The stagecoach rattled into Delta, Colorado on a blistering June afternoon in 1882, carrying not just one woman but two. And Thomas Reed watched from the porch of his ranch house with his heart lodging somewhere in his throat because he had only been expecting a bride, not a bride with her grandmother in tow. He stood there in the dust and heat, his worn hat pushed back on his head, sweat trickling down his spine beneath his work shirt, and wondered what in the hell he was going to do now. The letters had been exchanged over 6 months, carefully worded missives that spoke of loneliness and hope, of a man who needed a partner, and a woman seeking a fresh start far from Boston. Nowhere in those letters had Olivia Hayes mentioned bringing anyone with her. And now here she was, stepping down from that stagecoach with her skirts dusty from travel, and her hand extended to help an older woman who moved with surprising spryness, despite her silver hair and lined face. Thomas crossed the yard quickly, his boots kicking up small clouds of dirt, and he pulled his hat off as he approached because his mother had raised him right even if she had been gone for 15 years now. 15 long years since the fever had taken both his parents within 3 days of each other, leaving him alone on this ranch at the age of 18 with nothing but cattle, horses, and a silence so deep it sometimes felt like drowning. "Mr. Reid," Olivia said, and her voice was softer than he had imagined, with a cultured Eastern accent that seemed out of place in the raw landscape of western Colorado. She was prettier than her photograph, too, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight and green eyes that met his with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I apologize for the surprise. This is my grandmother, Margaret Hayes. I hope you will forgive me for not mentioning her in my letters, but I could not leave her behind. She has no one else." The older woman stepped forward and extended her hand like a man would, gripping his firmly when he took it. "I can cook, clean, mend, and I do not eat much, Mr. Reed. I will earn my keep and not be a burden to you. Olivia told me you had a large house, and I promise I will make myself useful." Thomas looked between the two women, saw the way Olivia's hand rested protectively on her grandmother's shoulder, saw the set of her chin that said she would get right back on that stagecoach if he refused them, and he thought about his empty house with its 4 bedrooms that no one had slept in for years, about the meals he ate alone at a table built for 8, about the silence that greeted him every evening when he came in from the range. "I have room," he heard himself say, and the relief that flooded Olivia's face made something warm unfurl in his chest. "The house is big enough for all of us. Let me get your trunks." They had 3 trunks between them, heavy things that spoke of lives carefully packed away, and Thomas loaded them onto his wagon with the help of the stagecoach driver. The ride back to the ranch was quiet except for the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady clip of the horses' hooves. Olivia sat beside him on the bench while Margaret sat in the back, and he could feel the tension radiating from the younger woman as they traveled the 3 miles from town. His ranch spread out across a valley with the Uncompahgre Plateau rising in the distance, and he had 300 head of cattle, 20 horses, and a house that his father had built with dreams of a large family that had never materialized. It was a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch, painted white once though the paint had faded to a weathered gray, and as they pulled up in front of it, he heard Margaret make a small sound of approval. "It is a good house," she said. "Strong bones. It just needs some attention." Thomas helped them both down from the wagon and carried the trunks inside one by one. The interior was clean because he kept it that way, but it was sparse and masculine with none of the touches that made a house a home. He showed them to the 2 bedrooms on the ground floor, across the hall from each other, and Margaret immediately began unpacking while Olivia stood in the doorway of what would be her room, her hands clasped in front of her. "I know this is not what you expected," she said quietly, and he turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. She was 22 according to her letters, 8 years younger than him, and there was something in her eyes that spoke of loss and determination in equal measure. "If you want us to leave, I will understand. I should have told you about grandmother Margaret, but I was afraid you would say no, and I had nowhere else to go." "Why did you leave Boston?" he asked, because that question had been in his mind since her first letter, since a well-spoken woman from a good family had answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride. Olivia looked down at her hands. "My parents died last year. Influenza. The house had to be sold to pay debts I did not know existed, and my father's business partner took everything else. My grandmother and I were left with almost nothing, and the relatives who might have taken us in made it clear. They considered us burdens. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper, and it seemed like Providence. A chance to start fresh, to build something new instead of living on charity and resentment." Thomas nodded slowly. He understood loss, understood pride, understood the bone-deep need to make your own way in the world. "You can stay," he said. "Both of you. I meant what I said. I have room, and truth be told, this house has been too quiet for too long." The relief in her eyes made him want to promise her things he had no business promising to a woman he had just met. But he held his tongue and went back outside to tend to the horses. He could hear the two women moving around inside, hear their voices rising and falling in conversation, and it was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. That first evening, Margaret cooked dinner using the supplies he had in the pantry, and the three of them sat at the long table in the dining room with food that actually had seasoning and flavor instead of the bland fare he usually made for himself. Margaret asked him questions about the ranch, about the land, about his plans and his livestock, and her shrewd eyes seemed to take in everything he said and everything he did not say. Olivia was quieter, but she listened intently, and when he mentioned that he had lost his parents young, he saw understanding flash across her face. After dinner, she insisted on washing the dishes while Margaret retired to her room, claiming exhaustion from the journey, though Thomas suspected the old woman was giving them time alone. He dried while Olivia washed, and they worked in companionable silence for a while before she spoke. "Tell me about your family. Your letters mentioned them briefly, but I would like to know more." So he told her about his father who had come west with dreams of building something lasting, about his mother who had been a teacher back in Ohio and had filled their house with books and music. He told her about the fever that had taken them, about being 18 and suddenly alone with a ranch to run and no idea how to do it. "But you managed," Olivia said softly. "You built it into something successful." "I survived," Thomas corrected. "I kept the ranch going, but I did not really live. I just worked and slept and worked some more. After a while, I realized I was 30 years old and had not had a real conversation with another person in weeks. That is when I placed the advertisement." Olivia nodded and handed him the last plate. "I understand loneliness. After my parents died, even with grandmother Margaret, I felt so alone. Everyone in our social circle pulled away as if poverty were contagious. I thought perhaps out here things might be different, simpler maybe, more honest." "It is honest work," Thomas agreed. "Hard work, but honest. And the land does not care about your bank account or your family name. It cares about whether you are willing to put in the effort." They talked until the moon rose high and bright, sitting on the porch with the sounds of the night around them, and Thomas felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for years. When they finally said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, he lay awake for a long time, thinking about green eyes and a soft voice, and the way the house felt different with people in it. The next morning, he woke before dawn as always and headed out to start the day's work. His ranch hand, a grizzled man named Pete who came in 3 days a week, was due that afternoon, but the morning chores were his alone. He fed the horses, checked the cattle in the near pasture, and was mending a section of fence when he heard footsteps behind him. Olivia stood there in a simple work dress with her hair braided back and a determined look on her face. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me about the ranch, about the work. I want to be a partner, not just a burden." Thomas looked at her fine hands, her city-bred appearance, and saw the steel in her spine. "It is hard work," he warned. "Hot and dirty and sometimes dangerous." "I am not afraid of hard work," she replied. "I am afraid of being useless." So he taught her, starting with the basics. He showed her how to check the fences for damage, how to read the signs of sick cattle, how to handle the horses without spooking them. She listened intently, asked intelligent questions, and did not complain when the sun beat down mercilessly or when she got dirt under her fingernails. By midday, her face was flushed with heat and exertion, but her eyes were bright with accomplishment. Margaret had not been idle either. When they came in for lunch, the house smelled of fresh bread and something savory cooking on the stove. The windows had been opened to let in the breeze, and there were wildflowers in a jar on the table, small touches that made the place feel lived in. "I found your mother's garden out back," Margaret said as she served them stew and thick slices of bread. "Or what is left of it. With your permission, I would like to restore it. Fresh vegetables would do us all good." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. He had not been able to look at that garden in years, had let it go wild because tending it reminded him too much of his mother's gentle hands in the soil. "Yes," he managed. "That would be good." Over the following weeks, a rhythm developed. Thomas and Olivia worked the ranch together, and he found himself looking forward to her company, to the way she tackled every task with determination even when it was clear she had no idea what she was doing. She learned quickly, though, picking up the skills of ranch life with a natural aptitude that surprised him. Margaret worked her own magic on the house and garden. The interior began to shine with cleanliness and care. Curtains were mended and rehung, and the rooms took on warmth and character. The garden flourished under her attention, and soon they had fresh lettuce, radishes, and herbs to supplement their meals. She hummed while she worked, old songs that drifted through the windows and made Thomas think of his mother. One evening in late July, after a particularly long day of moving cattle to fresh pasture, Thomas and Olivia sat on the porch with glasses of cool water drawn from the well. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, and the air had finally cooled to something bearable. "I never thanked you properly," Olivia said, breaking the comfortable silence, "for taking us in, for accepting grandmother Margaret without hesitation, for treating me like a partner instead of a servant or an obligation." Thomas turned to look at her. The fading light caught in her hair, turning it to burnished copper, and there was dirt smudged on her cheek that she had missed. Without thinking, he reached out and gently wiped it away with his thumb, and she went very still, her eyes meeting his. "You are not an obligation," he said quietly. "You and Margaret, you have brought this place back to life. I did not realize how dead it had become until you arrived. I hear laughter now. Music. The house feels like a home again instead of just a building I sleep in." Olivia's hand came up to cover his where it still rested against her cheek. "I was so scared when I stepped off that stage coach," she confessed. "Scared you would take one look at us and send us away. Scared I had made a terrible mistake. But you have been nothing but kind and patient, and I find myself grateful every day that I answered your advertisement." Thomas felt his heart beating hard against his ribs. They had been living under the same roof for more than a month now. working side by side, sharing meals and conversation, and somewhere along the way, his feelings had shifted from cautious hope to something much deeper. "Olivia," he started, then stopped, not sure how to put it into words. She smiled, soft and understanding. "We have time," she said gently. "We do not need to rush anything. We are still getting to know each other." But Thomas shook his head. "I know enough," he said. "I know you are strong and brave and kind. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know you love your grandmother fiercely and you treat my home with respect and care. I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is seeing you at breakfast. And I know that when I go to sleep at night, I am grateful you are here." Olivia's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Thomas, I came here expecting to fulfill a contract, to make a practical arrangement work for both of us. I did not expect to find someone who made me feel safe and valued. Someone who looks at me like I matter, not because of my family name or my social standing, but because of who I am." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not move. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a promise of things to come. She sighed against his mouth, her hand sliding up to curl around the back of his neck, and they stayed like that as the sun finished setting and the stars began to emerge. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little unsteadily, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I want this to be real," he said. "Not just a mail-order arrangement, a real marriage, a real partnership." "It already is real," Olivia whispered. "It has been since the moment you said we could stay." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Delta. Margaret cried happy tears, and Pete stood as witness along with the shopkeeper's wife, whom Margaret had befriended on her trips into town. Olivia wore a dress that had been her mother's, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and she carried wildflowers from the garden. Thomas had never been good with words, but when the minister asked him to speak his vows, he looked into Olivia's eyes and said, "I promise to stand beside you always, to share both the burdens and the joys, to build a life with you that honors both where we have come from and where we are going. You have given me back something I thought I had lost forever, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Olivia's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to work beside you, to support you, and to love you with everything I have. You took a chance on me, on us, and you gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go. I will never forget that, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret opening your door and your heart." The wedding dinner was held at the ranch, with Margaret cooking a feast and Pete regaling them with stories from his years working cattle drives. It was simple and perfect, and when the evening ended and everyone had gone, Thomas led Olivia upstairs to the master bedroom that had stood empty for so long. They came together with tenderness and a passion that had been building for weeks, learning each other's bodies and hearts in the soft lamplight. Olivia was shy at first, but responded to his gentle touches with growing confidence, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, both breathing hard and wonderfully content, Thomas felt a completeness he had never known. "I love you," he said into the darkness, and her hand found his and squeezed. "I love you too," she replied. "I think I started falling the moment you looked at grandmother Margaret and said you had room. That is when I knew you were a good man." Thomas Reid. The summer turned to fall, and the ranch work intensified with the approach of winter. They spent long days preparing, cutting hay and stacking it in the barn, checking and double-checking fences, moving the cattle to winter pastures. Olivia worked beside Thomas every day, her hands growing calloused and strong, her face tanned from the sun. Margaret continued to manage the house with quiet efficiency, and she also took over the care of the chickens Thomas had never bothered much with. Soon they had fresh eggs daily and the promise of chicken dinners when needed. She also began teaching Olivia how to preserve food for the winter, and the pantry filled with jars of vegetables and fruits. One October evening, Thomas came in from the range to find Olivia sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in her hands and tears streaming down her face. His heart seized with fear as he rushed to her side. "What is it? What happened?" She looked up at him with a tremulous smile. "It is from my father's lawyer in Boston. He has been searching for assets, and he found some railroad stocks that my father had purchased years ago and forgotten about. They have increased in value substantially. He is selling them and sending us the money." "Thomas, it is enough to buy more cattle, to hire another hand to really expand the ranch." Thomas pulled her to her feet and into his arms, feeling her shake with relief and joy. "That is wonderful news," he said, but he was looking at her face, not thinking about money or expansion. "But you know the ranch is doing fine. We do not need that money to survive." Olivia shook her head. "I know, but it means I am bringing something to this marriage besides myself and my grandmother. It means I can truly be a partner." He cupped her face in his hands, making her meet his eyes. "You have been a partner since the day you arrived. You have given me more than money could ever buy. You have given me a reason to come inside at night. You have given me laughter and conversation and love. The money is wonderful, and we will use it wisely, but it does not change anything about what you mean to me." She kissed him then, hard and fierce, and Margaret discreetly disappeared to her room while they reaffirmed their love in the privacy of their bedroom. The money did allow them to expand, though. By spring of 1883, they had hired 2 more hands and purchased another 100 head of cattle. Thomas also bought Olivia her own horse, a pretty mare with good sense and a gentle disposition, and she rode out with him regularly to check on the herds. Margaret's garden expanded as well, and she began selling her surplus vegetables in town, earning money that she insisted on putting toward household improvements. New curtains appeared, and real dishes instead of the mismatched set Thomas had been using. A rocking chair materialized on the porch, and Margaret could often be found there in the evenings, knitting and watching the sunset. But it was not all peaceful. In June, a summer storm rolled through with unusual ferocity, bringing hail that damaged part of the barn roof and lightning that started a small grass fire. Thomas and his hands fought for hours to contain it, while Olivia and Margaret worked to calm the panicked horses and move the chickens to safety. When it was over, they stood together in the rain-soaked yard, dirty and exhausted, and surveyed the damage. It could have been much worse, but it would take time and money to repair everything. Thomas felt the old weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, the fear that everything could be lost in a moment. Olivia took his hand and squeezed. "We will fix it," she said firmly. "Together." That is what partners do. And they did. Over the following weeks, they worked to repair the damage, and Thomas marveled at how different it was to face challenges with someone beside him instead of alone. Olivia never complained, never faltered, and her steady presence gave him strength he had not known he possessed. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Margaret emerged from the house with a serious expression. "I need to speak with both of you," she said, settling into her rocking chair with a slight wince that she tried to hide. Thomas exchanged a worried glance with Olivia. "What is it, Grandmother Margaret?" The old woman smiled at the title he had adopted naturally over the past year. "I am not getting any younger," she said bluntly, "and I have been feeling my age more lately. I want you both to know how grateful I am for this past year, for the home you have given me, for treating me with respect and kindness. I want you to know that I have been happier here than I was in Boston, even in the good years." Olivia moved to kneel beside her grandmother's chair, taking the weathered hands in hers. "You are not going anywhere," she said fiercely. "You are strong and healthy, and we need you." Margaret stroked her granddaughter's hair with a gentle smile. "I am not planning to leave you any time soon, child, but I am 73 years old, and I have learned that life is uncertain. I simply wanted to make sure you knew how much this has meant to me. When we stepped off that stagecoach, I was terrified that we would be turned away, that we would end up in some charity home or worse. But Thomas opened his home and his heart, and he gave us a family again. That is a gift beyond measure." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "You have given me just as much," he said roughly. "Both of you. You brought life back into this house, into my life. I was just existing before you came, and now I am living again. So the gratitude goes both ways." They sat together as the sun set. Three people who had found each other through circumstance and built something real through choice and effort and love. The year turned to 1884, and with spring came exciting news. Olivia was pregnant. She told Thomas one morning in March, her eyes shining with joy and nervousness, and he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. Margaret cried and immediately began planning, talking about baby clothes and cradles and all the things they would need. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Olivia struggled with sickness that lasted far longer than the first few months. Thomas worried constantly, hovering over her until she finally snapped at him in August to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said with exasperation. "I can still work, still do things. I will not break." But he could not help worrying, could not help remembering stories of women who did not survive childbirth, and his fear must have shown on his face because Olivia's expression softened. She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly where their child moved and kicked. "Feel that," she said softly. "That is life, Thomas, strong and determined. This baby is going to be fine, and so am I. You have to trust that." He tried, though it was not easy. Margaret was a godsend during those months, taking over more of the housework and cooking, making sure Olivia rested when she needed to, but also encouraging her to stay active and strong. The baby came in November, and the labor was long and hard. The doctor from Delta came and stayed, and Thomas paced the downstairs for hours while Olivia's cries echoed through the house. He had never felt so helpless, so terrified, and when Margaret finally emerged with tears on her face, his heart stopped. "You have a son," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy son, and Olivia is tired but well. She is asking for you." Thomas took the stairs 3 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Olivia propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, and her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when he approached on shaking legs, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red, squalling infant with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Our son," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Thomas, we have a son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face, at the miniature hands waving in the air, and felt something crack open in his chest. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I was so scared, Olivia. I thought I might lose you." She reached up to cup his cheek, her thumb brushing away a tear he had not realized he shed. "I told you we would be fine. This little one is as stubborn as both of us." He was determined to make his entrance dramatic. They named him Samuel Thomas Reid, after both their fathers, and he became the center of their world. Thomas had never imagined the fierce love he could feel for such a tiny person, the way his heart could expand to encompass this new life. He would stand over the cradle for long minutes just watching Samuel sleep, marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Margaret was besotted with her great-grandson, spending hours rocking him and singing old songs. The house filled with the sounds of a baby crying, laughing, babbling, and it was the most beautiful noise Thomas had ever heard. Olivia recovered slowly from the birth, and Thomas made sure she rested and healed properly. He took over more of the housework, and Pete and the other hands managed the ranch while he focused on his family. For the first time in his life, the ranch was not the most important thing, and that realization was both frightening and freeing. Samuel grew from an infant to a bright, curious toddler who followed his father around the ranch with determined steps. By the time he was 3, he was pestering Thomas to let him help with the horses, and Thomas made him a small saddle so he could ride in front of him on his rounds. In the spring of 1887, Olivia told Thomas she was pregnant again, and he experienced the same rush of joy and terror. This pregnancy was easier than the first, though, and in December, they welcomed a daughter they named Eleanor Margaret Reed. She had her mother's green eyes and auburn hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Margaret was slowing down by then, her joints aching more and her movements less spry, but she delighted in her great-grandchildren and spent her days teaching Samuel his letters and rocking Eleanor to sleep. The ranch continued to prosper. They had expanded steadily over the years, and Thomas now employed 5 full-time hands and had nearly 500 head of cattle. The house had been painted and repaired, new outbuildings constructed, and they were one of the more successful operations in the region. But success did not change who they were at their core. Thomas still worked alongside his hands every day, and Olivia still rode out when she could, though now she had to balance ranch work with caring for 2 young children. Margaret still tended her garden and cooked meals that drew compliments from everyone who tasted them. One evening in the summer of 1889, Thomas came in from the range to find Margaret sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, looking out at the sunset with a peaceful expression. Samuel and Eleanor were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the warm air, and Olivia was hanging laundry on the line, singing softly to herself. He stood there for a moment, taking it all in, remembering the man he had been 7 years ago, alone and lonely and slowly dying inside without even realizing it. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. Margaret turned and saw him standing there. "It is a good life, is it not?" she said softly. Thomas climbed the steps and sat on the porch rail beside her chair. "It is the best life," he agreed. "I never thought I would have this, a wife, children, family. After my parents died, I gave up on the idea of ever having these things." Margaret reached out and patted his hand. "Sometimes the best things come when we least expect them. Olivia and I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but hope and desperation, and you took us in without hesitation. You gave us everything, Thomas, and I want you to know that I see what you have built here. Not just the ranch, though that is impressive, but the family, the home, the love. That is your real legacy." He squeezed her hand gently. "You helped build it too, you and Olivia both. I just provided the land and the house. You provided the heart." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play and Olivia work. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." Thomas felt a chill despite the warm evening. "What is it?" Margaret kept her eyes on the sunset. "I am dying, Thomas. Not immediately, but soon. I have been having pains in my chest, and I know what they mean. I have maybe a year, perhaps less." "No," Thomas said immediately. "We will get the doctor. We will take you to Denver if we need to. There must be something that can be done." She shook her head. I am 79 years old. I have lived a long life, and the past 7 years have been the sweetest of all. I do not want to spend my remaining time fighting the inevitable or lying in some hospital bed. I want to be here with my family for as long as I am able." Thomas felt tears burning his eyes. "Does Olivia know?" "Not yet. I will tell her soon, but I wanted to tell you first. I need you to promise me something, Thomas. When I am gone, I need you to take care of her. I know you will. I know you love her, but she has already lost so much. Losing me will be hard, and she will need your strength." "I promise," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "But you are not gone yet. We still have time." Margaret smiled. "Yes, we do, and I intend to make the most of every moment." She kept her word. Over the following months, Margaret continued her routines as much as she was able, though Thomas and Olivia both noticed she tired more easily and moved more slowly. When Olivia finally noticed and confronted her grandmother, Margaret told her the truth, and Olivia wept in Thomas's arms that night, grieving for a loss that had not yet come but was inevitable. But they did not let grief steal the joy from the time they had. Margaret taught Olivia all her recipes, writing them down in a careful hand so they would not be lost. She told stories to Samuel and Alina about their great-great-grandparents, about Boston and the old days, preserving family history for the next generation. She sat in her rocking chair and watched the family she loved go about their days, and she was content. Margaret Hayes died peacefully in her sleep on a cold February night in 1890, with her family around her and no pain on her face. They buried her in a plot on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Beloved grandmother and friend." The whole town turned out for the funeral because over the years, Margaret had become a fixture in Delta, known for her kindness and her sharp wit and her incredible cooking. Olivia grieved deeply, and Thomas held her through the dark nights when she cried for the woman who had raised her after her parents died, who had stood by her through everything, who had been her anchor and her strength. But even in her grief, Olivia found comfort in the legacy Margaret had left behind, in the recipes and stories and memories that would live on. The house felt emptier without Margaret's presence, but life continued. Samuel started school in town, riding in with Thomas several times a week and staying with the schoolteacher during the days. Alina was 4 now and helping her mother in the kitchen, her serious little face focused intently on whatever task she was given. In the spring of 1891, Olivia told Thomas she was pregnant again, and he saw both joy and sadness in her eyes because Margaret would never meet this child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in October, they welcomed another son they named Matthew Reed. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin, and from the start, he was a force of nature. The years passed in the way they do on a working ranch, full of hard work and small joys. Samuel grew into a serious, responsible young man who took to ranching naturally. Alina was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Matthew was wild and fearless, constantly giving his parents heart attacks with his antics. In 1895, Thomas and Olivia celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary. They were in their 40s now, their faces lined with experience and sun, their hands calloused from work. The ranch had grown to be one of the largest in the region, employing a dozen hands and running over 1,000 head of cattle. But on their anniversary evening, with the children asleep and the house quiet, they sat on the porch where they had first kissed all those years ago, and Thomas pulled Olivia close against his side. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Answering that advertisement, coming out here, marrying a stranger?" Olivia tilted her head to look up at him, her eyes still as green and clear as the day she had stepped off that stagecoach. "Never," she said firmly. "You gave me and grandmother Margaret a home when we had nowhere else to go. You gave us family and love and purpose. You made every day an adventure, even the hard ones. How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" Thomas kissed her forehead. "I was so scared that day you arrived. I saw you and Margaret step down from that stage, and I thought I had made a terrible mistake. I thought there was no way this would work, no way I could make you happy. But then you looked at me with those determined eyes, and I saw your strength, and I knew that if I could just convince you to stay, everything would be all right." "You did not have to convince me," Olivia said. "The moment you said you had room, I knew I was home. I knew you were the kind of man who would do the right thing even when it was not the easy thing. That is why I fell in love with you, Thomas, not because of the ranch or the house or any of it, but because of your heart." They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other across impossible distances and built a life that neither could have imagined. The house behind them was full of children and memories and love. The land around them was prosperous and well tended. And the future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. In 1897, Samuel turned 16 and officially became a full partner in running the ranch. He had his father's way with cattle and his mother's head for business, and Thomas felt pride swell in his chest watching his son grow into a capable, confident man. Eleanor was 13 and had announced her intention to become a teacher like her great-great-grandmother, much to Olivia's delight. Matthew, at 6, was still a wild thing, but he had his father's heart and his mother's stubbornness, and Thomas knew he would find his way. The town of Delta had grown over the years as well. The railroad had come through in 1891, bringing with it new opportunities and new people. The small frontier town had become a thriving community, and Thomas and Olivia were pillars of it, respected and liked in equal measure. One spring morning in 1898, Thomas woke early as always and lay for a moment watching Olivia sleep beside him. Her hair was threaded with silver now, spreading across the pillow, and there were lines around her eyes and mouth that had not been there when she arrived 16 years ago. But to him, she was more beautiful than ever, because those lines came from laughter and smiles, and the silver in her hair was earned through years of hard work and love. She stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "What are you thinking about?" she murmured, her voice still rough with sleep. "I am thinking about the day you arrived," he said. "About how terrified I was and how that terror turned to hope and then to love. I am thinking about how empty my life was before you and Margaret came and how full it is now. I am thinking about how grateful I am that you took a chance on a lonely cowboy with a big empty house and a desperate advertisement in a newspaper." Olivia reached up to cup his cheek. "I am thinking about how you took a chance on us. How you saw past the fact that I brought my grandmother without asking. How you made room not just in your house but in your heart. You gave us a family when we had lost ours, Thomas. You gave us everything." He kissed her then, slow and deep, a kiss that held 16 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We should get up," Olivia said without making any move to do so. "Samuel needs help moving the cattle to the north pasture, and Eleanor has school, and Matthew will be into mischief if we do not keep an eye on him." "In a minute," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "Let me just hold you for a minute more." They lay there together as the sun rose, as it had risen every day for 16 years, as it would continue to rise for all the years to come. Outside, the ranch was waking up, cattle lowing and horses whinnying, and the sounds of the hands starting their day. Inside, 3 children slept peacefully, safe and loved. And in this bedroom, 2 people who had found each other against all odds held each other close and were grateful. Later that day, as Thomas rode out with Samuel to check the herds, his son turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Father, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Thomas replied, guiding his horse around a rocky outcrop. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "How did you know Mother was the right one? When she arrived with great-grandmother Margaret, how did you know to let them stay to build a life together?" Thomas smiled, remembering. "I did not know at first," he admitted. "I was terrified. But then I looked at your mother, at the way she stood there so brave despite being scared, at the way she protected her grandmother, and I saw strength and love and determination. I saw someone who would fight for the people she cared about. And I thought that if she could care about me even half as much as she cared about Margaret, I would be the luckiest man alive." "And were you?" Samuel asked. "Lucky, I mean." "Luckier than I ever deserved to be," Thomas said. "Your mother and great-grandmother Margaret, they saved me, Samuel. I was dying inside when they arrived, just going through the motions. They brought life back into my world, gave me a reason to care about more than just surviving. That is what real love does. It makes you more than you were alone." Samuel nodded slowly. "I hope I find that someday. Someone who makes me more." Thomas reached over and gripped his son's shoulder. "You will. And when you do, do not let fear or doubt or anything else stop you from taking the chance. The best things in life require courage." That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner as they did every night. It was a noisy, chaotic affair with Matthew chattering nonstop about his day, Alina trying to tell a story about something that happened at school, and Samuel discussing ranch business with Thomas. Olivia presided over it all with a serene smile, occasionally interjecting to keep the conversation from getting too wild. After dinner, as was their custom, they all moved to the porch. Thomas and Olivia sat in the rocking chairs that had been Margaret's. Samuel whittled a piece of wood, Alina read by lamplight, and Matthew played with his toy horses in the yard. It was a simple moment, ordinary in every way, and yet Thomas felt his heart swell with contentment. This was what he had dreamed of during all those lonely years, what he had not even dared hope for when he placed that advertisement. A family. A home. Love that filled every corner and made even the hard days bearable. Olivia reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. She did not say anything, but she did not need to. They had long since passed the point where words were necessary for everything. They could communicate in glances and touches, in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other completely. As the sun set over the Colorado landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Thomas Reed looked at the life spread out before him and knew he had everything he had ever wanted. The lonely cowboy who had placed a desperate advertisement in a Boston newspaper was gone, replaced by a husband, father, and grandfather who had found his place in the world. The years continued to unfold in their predictable yet precious way. In 1899, the Reed family welcomed a new member when Samuel married a girl from town named Catherine Morgan. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half of Delta in attendance, and Thomas watched his son exchange vows with tears in his eyes, remembering his own wedding 17 years earlier. Samuel and Catherine built a small house on the far end of the property, and soon they announced they were expecting their first child. Thomas was going to be a grandfather, and the realization was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. Olivia laughed at his reaction and reminded him that he had been essentially a grandfather to Margaret's relationship with him, and he would be wonderful at this too. The baby arrived in the spring of 1900, a daughter they named Margaret Hayes Reed, And when they placed her in Thomas's arms for the first time, he looked down at the tiny face and felt the same overwhelming love he had felt for his own children. This little girl carried his grandmother's name, connecting past and present in a beautiful, unbroken line. Eleanor, now 16, had received a scholarship to attend a teaching college in Denver. It was a bittersweet moment when she left, the house feeling emptier without her bright curiosity and constant questions. But she wrote regularly, and her letters were filled with excitement about her studies and her plans for the future. Matthew, at 9, was beginning to show an interest in horses beyond just playing with them. Thomas started teaching him more seriously about breeding and training, and the boy took to it naturally. He had a gentle way with even the most skittish animals, a gift that could not be taught. Olivia had taken over Margaret's role as the heart of not just their home but the community. She organized church socials, helped new families get settled, and was known for her generosity and kindness. The house was frequently full of visitors, and she handled it all with grace and warmth. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, Thomas took Olivia into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, a rare evening away from the ranch and the family. They dressed in their finest clothes, and Thomas felt his breath catch when Olivia descended the stairs in a deep green dress that matched her eyes. "You are staring," she said with a smile, but there was pleasure in her eyes at his reaction. "I am appreciating," he corrected. 20 years married, and you still take my breath away." The dinner was excellent, but Thomas barely tasted it. He was too busy watching his wife, listening to her talk, marveling at the fact that this incredible woman had chosen to spend her life with him. When they returned home late that evening, the children already asleep, they stood on their porch and looked out at the ranch spread before them in the moonlight. "You remember the first night we stood here?" Thomas asked. "After we washed the dishes together." Olivia leaned against him. "I remember thinking that you were nothing like I expected. I thought you would be rough and crude, a simple cowboy looking for someone to cook and clean. But you talked to me about your parents, about your dreams and your loneliness, and I realized you were so much more than I could have imagined." "I kissed you that night," Thomas said. "Right here on this porch. I was so nervous I almost talked myself out of it." "I am glad you did not," Olivia said softly. "That kiss was the beginning of everything. It was when I let myself believe that this could be more than just a practical arrangement. That I could love and be loved again after losing so much." Thomas turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. "These 20 years have been the best of my life. Every day with you is a gift, Olivia. Every laugh, every conversation, every moment of working together and raising our children and building this life. I would live them all over again in a heartbeat." She kissed him then, deep and passionate, and they came together that night with all the heat and tenderness of a love that had been tested by time and come through stronger for it. The early 1900s brought changes to the American West. The frontier was officially closed, towns were growing into cities, and the wild, untamed land was becoming settled and civilized. But on the Raid Ranch, life continued its steady rhythm of seasons and work and family. In 1903, Samuel and Catherine welcomed their second child, a son they named Thomas Jr., after his grandfather. Eleanor graduated from teaching college and took a position at the school in Delta, moving back home much to everyone's delight. Matthew, now 12, was spending every spare moment with the horses and had announced his intention to become the best horse trainer in Colorado. Thomas was 50 now, his body bearing the marks of decades of hard physical labor. His back ached on cold mornings, and his joints were not as flexible as they once were. But he still rode out every day, still worked alongside his hands, still refused to slow down despite Olivia's concerned nagging. "You are not 18 anymore," she told him one morning after he came in limping from a full day in the saddle. "You need to start taking it easier. Let Samuel handle more of the work." Thomas just pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I will rest when I am dead. Until then, I have a ranch to run and a family to provide for." But he did begin delegating more to Samuel, teaching his son everything he knew about running the operation. Samuel was capable and smart, and Thomas knew the ranch would be in good hands when it was fully his someday far in the future. One warm summer evening in 1905, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch house for dinner. Samuel and Catherine were there with their 2 children. Eleanor had brought a young man from town she was courting, a banker's son named David. Matthew, now 14, entertained his niece and nephew with stories and games. Thomas sat at the head of the table with Olivia beside him, and he looked around at the faces of the people he loved most in the world. This was what he and Olivia had built together, this legacy of love and family and connection. After dinner, as everyone relaxed on the porch and in the yard, Olivia slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking about that day in 1882 when I stood in the yard and watched a stagecoach arrive carrying my entire future," he said. "I am thinking about how close I came to being a bitter, lonely old man who died alone in an empty house. I am thinking about how you and Margaret saved me from that fate." Olivia rested her head on his shoulder. "You saved us just as much. We had nothing and nowhere to go, and you opened your home and your heart without hesitation. Everything we have, everything we are, started with that choice you made to say yes when you could have so easily said no." "It was the easiest yes I ever spoke," Thomas said. "Looking at you and Margaret, seeing the determination and hope in your eyes, I knew that if I turned you away, I would regret it for the rest of my life. And I have never once regretted saying you could stay." They sat together as the sun set, as they had countless times over the past 23 years. Around them, their children and grandchildren laughed and played and lived. Inside, the house that had been empty and silent was full of warmth and noise and love. And out on the range, cattle grazed peacefully on land that had been tamed and cultivated through years of hard work and dedication. Matthew came over and sat at his father's feet like he used to when he was small. "Father, tell us the story again, about when Mother arrived." Thomas smiled. This was a familiar request, one that never got old. "Your mother arrived on a blistering June afternoon in 1882, he began, and Olivia squeezed his hand as he spoke. "She stepped off that stagecoach with her grandmother, both of them dusty from travel and brave despite being scared. I was expecting just a bride, you understand, not a bride and her grandmother." Eleanor joined them, sitting on the porch steps with her young man beside her. Samuel and Catherine came closer with their children. The whole family gathered to hear a story they had all heard before but never tired of. "I thought about saying no," Thomas admitted. "I thought about telling them this was not what I had agreed to, that I had only sent for one person, not 2. But then your mother looked at me with those green eyes, and she said she could not leave her grandmother behind because she had no one else. And I looked at this big empty house behind me, and I thought about how lonely I had been, and I said I had room." "And that was when you fell in love," Matthew said, as if he had not heard this part a dozen times. "That was when I started to fall in love," Thomas corrected. "Real love takes time to build. It takes working together and facing challenges together and choosing each other every single day. Your mother and I, we built our love through hard work and patience and trust. And your great-grandmother, Margaret, she was the foundation of it all." She taught us both what it meant to be family, to care for each other not because you have to, but because you want to. Olivia wiped tears from her eyes. She would be so proud to see all of this, to see what we have built together, what you have all become. I think she knows, Eleanor said softly. I think she is watching and smiling. The evening wore on, full of stories and laughter and love. When everyone finally departed to their own homes and beds, Thomas and Olivia stood alone on their porch one last time. 23 years, Olivia said. It feels like a lifetime and like no time at all. It is just the beginning, Thomas replied. We have many more years ahead of us, many more sunsets to watch from this porch, many more memories to make. And they did. The years continued to pass in their predictable, precious way. Eleanor married her banker in 1906 and moved to Denver, though she visited often and wrote weekly letters. Matthew took over the horse breeding operation in 1908 and made a name for himself across the state for the quality of his animals. Samuel and Catherine had 2 more children, and the ranch house was frequently full of grandchildren. Thomas and Olivia grew older together, their hair going fully silver, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still worked together, still sat on the porch every evening, still found joy in each other's company. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and Thomas gradually stepped back, content to watch his son carry on the legacy. In the spring of 1912, as Thomas turned 59 and Olivia 51, they decided to take a trip. They had never really traveled, never left the ranch for more than a day or 2 at a time, and they wanted to see something of the world beyond Colorado. They took the train to San Francisco, marveling at the changed landscape and the growing cities. They spent 2 weeks exploring the city, walking along the waterfront, eating in restaurants, seeing shows. It was a different world from their ranch, fast-paced and crowded and exciting. But as the train carried them back home, Olivia took Thomas's hand and said, "As wonderful as that was, I am ready to be home, to sleep in our own bed, to see our children and grandchildren, to sit on our porch and watch the sunset over land we know and love." Thomas felt exactly the same way. The trip had been amazing, but it had also reinforced how much they had built together, how deep their roots ran in the soil of their ranch. When they arrived back, the whole family was waiting to greet them. Samuel and Catherine and their 4 children, Matthew with his wife Emily, whom he had married the year before, and Eleanor and David with their new baby daughter. The house was full of noise and chaos and love, and Thomas looked at Olivia and saw his own joy reflected in her eyes. That evening, after everyone had gone and they were alone, Thomas pulled Olivia into his arms and held her close. "You know what I realized on this trip," he said. "I realized that no matter where we go or what we see, home is wherever you are. This ranch, this house, they are just buildings and land. But you are my home, Olivia. You have been since that first night we talked on the porch." Olivia looked up at him with eyes that still took his breath away even after 30 years. "And you are mine. You gave me a home when I had lost everything, but more than that, you gave me love and partnership and a life beyond anything I dreamed was possible. I love you, Thomas Reed. I have loved you since you said we could stay, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They kissed there in the privacy of their bedroom, and it was both familiar and new, a kiss that held 3 decades of shared life and looked forward to decades more. The years moved forward as years do. Thomas's 60th birthday in 1913 was marked by a large celebration with friends and family coming from all over Colorado. He stood surrounded by his children and grandchildren, 5 of them now with another on the way, and felt overwhelmed by the abundance of his life. Olivia, at 52, was still as active and energetic as ever, though she finally let Thomas convince her to hire help for the heavier housework. She spent her days with her grandchildren, teaching them the things Margaret had taught her, passing down family recipes and stories and wisdom. The ranch now sprawled over 3,000 acres with over 1,500 head of cattle and a thriving horse breeding operation. They employed 20 hands year-round and more during busy seasons. It was one of the most successful ranches in western Colorado, and Thomas felt pride in what they had built, but never forgot that none of it would have been possible without Olivia and Margaret. In 1915, the world was changing rapidly. War raged in Europe, though America had not yet entered it. Automobiles were becoming common. Electricity was reaching even rural areas, and the old ways were slowly disappearing. But on the Raid Ranch, while they adopted new technologies when practical, the fundamental rhythms of life remained the same. Thomas was 62 now and finally accepting that he could not do everything he once could. He spent more time supervising and less time in the saddle, though he still insisted on riding out several times a week. Olivia worried about him, but she knew better than to try to make him stop completely. The ranch was in his blood, and taking him away from it completely would kill him faster than any physical ailment. One October evening, as they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary, Thomas presented Olivia with a gift. It was a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate designs, and inside was a letter. Olivia opened it with trembling fingers and read, "My dearest Olivia, 33 years ago today, you became my wife in a ceremony at the church in Delta. But you became my partner long before that, on the day you arrived with your grandmother and I said you could stay. These 33 years have been the greatest adventure of my life, full of joys and challenges and love beyond measure. You have given me children and grandchildren, a home full of laughter, and a reason to wake up grateful every single morning. I cannot promise you eternity, but I can promise you every remaining day I have on this earth, I will love you with everything I am. Forever yours, Thomas." Olivia was crying by the time she finished reading. She looked up at her husband, this man who had taken a chance on a desperate woman and her grandmother, who had built a life and a legacy with patience and hard work and unwavering love. "I do not need promises of eternity," she said through her tears. "I have had 33 years of the most incredible life, and if I died tomorrow, I would die the happiest woman who ever lived." Thomas pulled her close and held her while she cried happy tears, and he thought about that terrified young man who had stood in the yard watching a stagecoach arrive. He wished he could go back and tell that man that everything would be all right, that saying yes would be the best decision he ever made, that love and family and home were waiting just beyond his fear. But he could not go back, and he would not want to even if he could, because every moment of the past 33 years had been precious and necessary. The struggles had made them stronger, the joys had been sweeter for being shared, and the love had deepened with every passing year. They sat together on their porch as the sun set, as they had done thousands of times before. Inside, the house was quiet but not empty, full of the echoes of all the life that had filled it over the decades. Outside, the land stretched away in all directions, prosperous and well-tended, a testament to their shared work. "You remember what you said that first night?" Olivia asked. "You said the house had been too quiet for too long." Thomas smiled. "It has not been quiet since. Sometimes I think it is too loud, actually, with all the grandchildren running around." Olivia laughed. "You love it and you know it. You love every single moment of chaos and noise." "I do," he admitted, "because it means we are not alone. It means we built something that will last long after we are gone." Samuel will run this ranch, and then his children will. And they will tell their children the story of the mail-order bride who arrived with her grandmother and the lonely cowboy who made room and found the family he had lost. "It is a good story," Olivia said softly. "The best story because it is true." They sat together as the stars emerged, as the moon rose full and bright, as the sounds of the night surrounded them. Two people who had found each other across impossible distances, who had built a life of love and partnership, who had created a legacy that would endure. In 1917, America entered the Great War, and their world tilted again. Matthew, now 26, enlisted despite Emily's tears and their protests. He left for training in the summer, and the house felt emptier without his boisterous presence. They received letters regularly, and Thomas and Olivia clung to each word, praying for his safety. The war years were hard. They contributed to the war effort, sending supplies and money, keeping the ranch running to provide beef for the troops. They worried constantly about Matthew, and when the telegram arrived in November 1918 saying he had been wounded but would recover, Olivia collapsed in relief. Matthew came home in early 1919, thinner and quieter but alive. He bore scars both visible and invisible, and it took time for him to settle back into ranch life. But gradually, with Emily's patient love and his family's support, he healed and found his place again. Thomas was 66 now, and age was catching up with him. His back gave him constant trouble, and he moved slower than he once had. But his mind was still sharp, and he spent his days teaching his grandchildren about the ranch, about the land, about the importance of family and hard work. Olivia, at 58, had grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers, and she loved them all with fierce devotion. She was the center of the family, the one who held everyone together, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who made sure no one felt left out or forgotten. On a warm spring evening in 1920, the entire family gathered for Thomas's 67th birthday. The house overflowed with people, 3 generations of Reeds, and the noise and laughter echoed off the walls. They ate dinner outside at long tables set up in the yard, and as the sun set, Samuel stood and raised his glass. "To my father," he said, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "Who took a chance on a mail-order bride and her grandmother 38 years ago and built all of this? Who taught me everything I know about ranching and about being a man? Who showed me what love looks like when it is real and lasting and true? We are all here because of the choice you made to open your home and your heart, and we are grateful every single day." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. He stood, steadying himself with one hand on the table, and looked at the faces surrounding him. His children, his grandchildren, his legacy. "I did not do this alone," he said. "Everything you see here, everything we have built, it was done by 2 people working together. Your mother, your grandmother, my Olivia. She is the reason this ranch is more than just land and cattle. She is the reason this house is a home. She brought life and love into a place that was dying, and she has given me 38 years of happiness beyond anything I deserved or expected." He turned to Olivia, who was crying openly now. "You arrived with your grandmother on a blistering June day in 1882, and my life changed forever. I was so scared that day, so uncertain, but I looked into your eyes and I saw courage and determination and hope. I saw someone worth taking a chance on, someone worth building a life with, and every single day since then has proven that I was right. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Hayes Reed. You are my heart and my home." Olivia stood and went into his arms, and the family erupted in cheers and applause. They held each other as the stars emerged and their family celebrated around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. The 1920s brought more changes. The ranch adapted to new technologies. Automobiles replaced some of the horses, and modern conveniences made life easier. But the fundamental values remained the same. Hard work, family, integrity, love. Thomas's health declined gradually. By 1922, he could no longer ride, and he spent his days in a chair on the porch, watching the ranch operate around him. It frustrated him to be sidelined, but Olivia would not let him wallow in self-pity. "You have worked hard for 70 years," she told him firmly. "You have earned the right to rest and let others carry the burden. Samuel runs the ranch beautifully, Matthew handles the horses, and you have 7 grandchildren who will carry on everything you have taught them. Your legacy is secure, Thomas. Now let yourself enjoy the fruits of all that labor." So he tried. He spent his days with Olivia, talking and reminiscing and simply being together. They had been married for 40 years now, and the love between them had only deepened. They knew each other completely, could communicate without words, and found comfort in each other's presence. On a cool evening in October 1925, 43 years after Olivia had arrived, Thomas sat on the porch with his wife beside him. He was 72 now and feeling every year of it, but his mind was clear and his heart was full. "I want you to know something," he said to Olivia. "These 43 years, they have been everything to me. Every moment, every day, every challenge and joy. I have no regrets, Olivia. None. If I could live my life again, I would not change a single thing." Olivia took his hand, her own now as lined and weathered as his. "I feel the same way. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. You gave me love and family and home. You made me feel valued and important and cherished every single day. I could not have asked for more." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Inside, Samuel and Catherine were preparing dinner. Matthew and Emily lived in their own house now, but they were frequent visitors. Alina and David had moved back from Denver and built a house in town, close enough to visit regularly. "We did good, did we not?" Thomas said. "We built something that will last." "We did more than good," Olivia replied. "We built something extraordinary. We built a family, a home, a legacy of love that will carry on long after we are gone." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "Promise me something. When I am gone, promise me you will not grieve too long. Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy, keep being the heart of this family." Olivia turned to look at him, tears in her eyes. "Do not talk like that. You are going to be around for many more years." But Thomas shook his head. "We both know that is not true. My body is wearing out, Olivia. I am tired in a way that sleep does not fix. But I am not afraid because I have lived a full and happy life, and I know you will be all right. You are strong, stronger than you know." They sat together as the sun set one more time, holding hands and holding onto each other. Inside, the house that had once been empty and silent was full of life and love. Outside, the ranch that Thomas had built with his own hands and Olivia's partnership stretched away in all directions, prosperous and enduring. Thomas Reed died peacefully in his sleep on a cold December night in 1925, with Olivia beside him and his family close by. He was 72 years old, and he had lived to see his ranch become one of the most successful in Colorado. His children grown and happy, and his grandchildren thriving. They buried him next to Margaret on the hillside overlooking the ranch, and the entire town of Delta attended the funeral because Thomas had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Olivia stood at the graveside with her children and grandchildren surrounding her, and she did not cry because Thomas had asked her not to grieve too long. Instead, she spoke. Thomas Reed was a good man who took a chance on a desperate woman and her grandmother 43 years ago. He built a life of love and partnership, of hard work and integrity. He never wavered in his commitment to family, never failed to do the right thing, never stopped being grateful for what he had. He told me once that I saved him, but the truth is we saved each other. We built something beautiful together, and that legacy will continue in our children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. He lived well, loved deeply, and died knowing he had made a difference. What more could anyone ask? Olivia lived for another 12 years, presiding over the ranch house and the family with quiet dignity. She watched her grandchildren grow and marry, welcomed great-grandchildren, and kept the story of how she and Thomas had met alive for each new generation. She died in the spring of 1937 at the age of 76, surrounded by family and at peace. They buried her next to Thomas and Margaret, and the three headstones stood together on the hillside, marking the resting place of three people who had found each other through circumstance and built something lasting through choice. The ranch continued under Samuel's management and eventually passed to his children. The house remained in the family, full of new generations of Reeds who learned the story of their great-great-grandparents, of the mail-order bride who arrived with her grandmother and the cowboy who made room and found the family he had lost. And on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the Colorado landscape, you can almost feel their presence still. Two souls who loved each other across 43 years of marriage and beyond, who built a legacy that endures, who proved that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on hope and opening your heart to love.